Imagine the moment everything goes quiet. No more long messages. No more defending yourself. No more trying to explain pain to someone who keeps turning it into your fault. Just calm, just distance, just a silence so deep it changes the air in the room. And that is the moment everything starts to shift, because when someone has lived on your reactions, your calm does not feel small to them. It feels dangerous. It feels like the ground moving under their feet. Tonight, we are going deep into what happens when they finally realize you are done. Not loudly, not dramatically, but fully. Stay with me. Because this is where the real power shows itself. Not in revenge, not in payback, in peace, in clarity. In the quiet decision to stop giving your heart to a cycle that keeps draining it. What looks simple from the outside is not simple at all. It is the end of confusion. It is the end of begging to be understood. It is the end of trying to save something that keeps asking you to lose yourself. And once that truth lands, panic begins on one side while freedom begins on the other. That is the turning point. That is where your life starts sounding different, softer, stronger, cleaner. Because the second you choose yourself for real, the whole game changes, and the person who once felt powerful begins to feel something they never wanted to face. They are losing access to you. Letting go rarely arrives with a speech. It usually comes after the speeches have already failed, after the tears, after the long nights replaying conversations in your mind, after the effort of trying to be fair, patient, loving, and clear. Then one day something inside you gets tired in a new way. Not weak, not broken, just finished. You stop reaching for words because you finally see that words are being used against you. You stop chasing understanding because the door was never really open. And in that moment, a quiet kind of withdrawal begins. It does not always look dramatic. You may still be there physically, you may still answer, you may still show up. But emotionally, the door has started to close. You no longer hand over your peace every time they provoke you. You no longer feel the same need to jump in and defend your heart. That change is huge. It may look like stillness, but inside it is a full revolution. This is what makes it so unsettling for a controlling person. They know how to work with your emotion. They know how to push your guilt. They know how to stir your fear, your hope, your confusion. But calm gives them nothing to grab. Silence gives them no opening. And when they cannot pull you back into the old dance, they begin to feel the loss of influence before they even have words for it. Watch closely, because this is where the first crack appears, not in you, in the control they thought would always be there. For so long, your reactions were part of the system. Your anger told them they still mattered. Your sadness told them they could still reach you. Even your effort to explain yourself gave them proof that your inner world was still tied to their approval. Every argument, every late-night talk, every painful attempt to be heard kept the connection alive, even when it hurt you. That is why peace hits so hard. Peace says something arguments never could. It says, "You do not control me anymore." And that message lands without a single shout. Your calm becomes a wall they cannot climb. Your silence becomes a room they cannot enter. They may test it at first, a small jab, a cold remark, a sudden sweet message, a familiar pattern dressed in a new tone. They are looking for movement. They are looking for proof that the old access still exists. But if your center holds, if you stay grounded, if you refuse to perform the old pain, something strange begins to happen. Their confidence starts to shake, because the person who once counted on your emotional availability is now standing outside a door that no longer opens the same way. Stay with this part, because it matters. Your peace is not passive. It is not emptiness. It is active self-protection. It is wisdom in motion. It is your nervous system refusing to live in chaos anymore. And the more peaceful you become, the more obvious their dependence on disorder starts to look. That is when their panic begins to grow, because your healing removes the fuel their control once needed. Then your absence begins to speak, and not just physical absence, emotional absence. The kind that changes the whole energy of a room. You can be right there and still be unavailable to the old game. That is what makes it so powerful. When you used to argue, they had something to push against. When you used to cry, they had evidence that they still lived inside your heart. Even when it was painful, your engagement gave them a kind of position in your world. But now there is no stage, no script, no emotional labor, no long attempt to fix what keeps breaking in the same place. And in that quiet, a hard truth rises. Life feels different when your energy is no longer there to absorb the tension, soften the chaos, or carry the emotional weight. Suddenly, they are left with the space your presence used to fill. Not just your body, your patience, your empathy, your willingness to make sense of what never made sense. That void does not stay empty. It echoes. It forces reflection. It exposes habits that used to hide inside constant drama. This is why your absence often lands harder than confrontation ever did. Confrontation kept the bond alive. Withdrawal changes the temperature completely. It tells them, without saying a word, that your center is no longer available for occupation. And once that message settles, they start feeling something they tried to keep you feeling for a long time: instability. The difference is this: yours came from confusion. Theirs comes from losing access. That is a very different kind of fear. What many people call detachment is often misunderstood. From the outside, it can look cold. But real detachment is not cruelty. It is the point where your heart stops confusing pain with love. It is the point where loyalty stops meaning self-abandonment. It is the point where you finally understand that staying available to harm is not proof of strength. For a long time, your empathy may have kept you in place. Your patience may have convinced you that one more chance, one more talk, one more act of understanding might change everything. But growth begins when you see that some cycles survive because you keep feeding them with hope. That realization hurts. It hurts because it asks you to accept that love alone cannot heal a dynamic built on control. But it also frees you, because once you know that truth, you stop pouring your life into a container with no bottom. You stop measuring your goodness by how much mistreatment you can survive. You stop calling exhaustion devotion. This is the emotional graduation so many people struggle to name. Not because you stop feeling, but because you start feeling clearly. You see patterns instead of promises. You see repetition instead of rare mistakes. You see the cost. And once you truly see it, there is no honest way to unsee it. That is why this stage feels final. Because it is not a mood, it is an awakening. And awakenings do not politely return to sleep just because someone else is uncomfortable with the light. Once that clarity becomes stable, the old control system begins to collapse. This happens because control needs more than closeness. It needs participation. It needs self-doubt. It needs you to keep questioning your reality every time they bend it. It needs you to keep explaining yourself, defending yourself, proving your intentions, shrinking your truth just enough to keep the peace. But when you stop doing that, the machine begins to fail. The guilt no longer lands the same. The charm no longer reaches the same place. The blame no longer confuses you the same way. The pressure that once made you fold now meets a calmer, firmer version of you. And that version is harder to move. This is where the energy flips. They can feel it, even if they never admit it out loud. The usual levers stop working. The little traps stop closing. The emotional hooks stop sinking in. They may become restless here. They may push harder. They may switch roles fast, from charming to angry, from wounded to cold, from needy to superior, all in the same stretch of time. Why? Because something inside them is searching for the old door. They are trying every key they have ever used. But if you have truly stepped back into yourself, none of those keys fit anymore. And that is when panic deepens. Not loud at first, internal, unsteady, a private sense that something important is slipping beyond reach. Meanwhile, what is happening in you is very different. You are not stealing power. You are simply no longer handing it away. That difference matters because it means your strength is real, not reactive. It is built on self-respect, not on the need to win. Panic rarely arrives all at once. It tends to move in stages. First comes confusion. They notice the shift, but they do not fully believe it yet. They replay old patterns in their head. They expect the silence to break. They expect your calm to crack. They tell themselves this is temporary, that you are upset, that you will come back around, that you still need the old cycle more than you know. Then comes denial. They act as if nothing fundamental has changed. They may talk to you like the old access still exists. They may assume one familiar move will reset everything. But when the reset never comes, when your distance stays steady and your peace stays intact, The fear gets sharper. Then comes urgency. This is where they start trying different versions of themselves. Softer, sweeter, meaner, colder, more dramatic, more vulnerable, more flattering, more accusing. Anything that might restart the emotional machine. And if one approach fails, they pivot fast to another. Stay with me here, because this part often confuses people. It can look like change. It can look like regret. It can even sound sincere. But urgency is not always transformation. Sometimes it is simply panic looking for a working tool. Then comes the visible cracking. The calm mask slips, the frustration shows, the blame intensifies, or the victim story grows louder. They swing between self-importance and emotional collapse because they are trying to survive a feeling they cannot manage well. Irrelevance. Not being able to affect you anymore feels like disappearance to someone who built identity around impact and control. That fear of irrelevance is the real engine under the surface. It is not always about missing you in a healthy way. It is often about what your detachment forces them to face. If they cannot move you, if they cannot confuse you, if they cannot pull you back into reaction, then who are they in that moment? What happens when the mirror goes still? What happens when the audience walks away? These are the questions your silence brings to the surface. And those questions are heavy because they point toward emptiness that constant control used to cover up. This is why your stillness can feel louder than any argument ever did. It takes away distraction. It removes the smoke. It leaves them with themselves. Meanwhile, something powerful is happening inside you. You are no longer in survival mode. You are no longer trying to decode every mood or predict every turn. You are becoming simpler inside, cleaner. Your body begins to learn what safety feels like again. Your thoughts begin to untangle. The need to over-explain starts fading. The habit of second-guessing starts losing strength. This is healing in motion. Quiet, but massive. And because you have already felt the grief of waking up, you are not shocked by what they are only now beginning to feel. You are ahead of the cycle. You are outside it. That is why your grounded presence becomes so important here. You do not need to chase closure. You do not need to prove what happened. You do not need them to agree with your reality for it to be real. That may be one of the most freeing truths of all. There comes a point when you stop explaining, and that point changes everything. For a long time, explanation may have felt like love, like effort, like honesty. You may have believed that if you just found the right words, the right tone, the right timing, things would finally make sense. So you explained your pain, you explained your limits, you explained why certain actions hurt, you explained your needs again and again, hoping understanding would create respect. But when someone is committed to twisting what you say, explanation becomes a weapon placed in the wrong hands. Your honesty gets used as material. Your openness becomes something to minimize, mock, reverse, or turn against you. Then one day it clicks. They do not need more information. They need less access. That realization is not bitter. It is clear. And clarity changes your behavior fast. You stop defending feelings you have every right to have. You stop asking permission to be affected by what affected you. You stop handing over your truth to someone who treats it like a debate. This is where the silence becomes final in a new way. It is not just distance, it is refusal to keep translating yourself for someone who benefits from misunderstanding you. To them, this can feel like rebellion. But really, it is self-trust. It is you deciding that your inner experience does not need to be approved in order to be valid. And that is a major shift, because once self-trust takes root, manipulation loses one of its favorite doorways: your doubt. When self-trust grows, self-worth starts returning to its proper place. This part matters deeply because so much damage in painful dynamics comes from looking outward for value that should have been protected inwardly. You may have spent years reading tone, chasing softer moments, waiting for one clear sign that you mattered in the way you hoped you did. You may have worked harder every time warmth was withheld, loved louder every time affection felt conditional, bent smaller every time peace seemed tied to your silence. That does something to the spirit. It teaches you to bargain with your own dignity for scraps of reassurance. But healing breaks that habit slowly, then all at once. You begin to see that validation, which must be chased, never feels secure even when you get it. You begin to understand that worth does not become real only when another person reflects it back to you. It was real before the neglect, real before the blame, real before the confusion. It was simply buried under survival. Once that truth lands, your whole posture changes. Your voice steadies. Your choices become cleaner. You stop performing for approval. You stop shaping yourself around someone else's moods. You no longer feel compelled to prove your goodness by enduring more hurt. And that shift is easy to feel. Even in silence, it has weight. They may call it coldness, they may call it pride, they may call it selfishness. But what they are actually seeing is independence. They are watching a person who no longer depends on their approval to feel real. And without that dependency, a huge part of their influence dies. Then the urge to fight begins to leave your body. Not because you have no voice, but because you finally understand where your energy belongs. This is one of the quietest victories. At first, many people think healing should look like one last perfect argument, one last speech that says everything clearly enough to force accountability, one final moment where the truth becomes undeniable and everyone sees what really happened. But life does not always give that kind of ending, and sometimes chasing it keeps you tied to the very thing you are trying to leave. Real strength often looks less dramatic than people expect. It looks like choosing peace over performance. It looks like not entering every invitation to chaos. It looks like refusing to burn your nervous system down just to be right in the eyes of someone committed to misunderstanding you. That is not weakness. That is wisdom. You begin to understand that some battles are structured to keep you involved, not to be solved. And once you see that, you stop measuring victory by whether the other person admits the truth. You measure it by whether you left with yourself intact. That is the shift. That is the freedom. Because conflict was often the last thread keeping the emotional system alive. As long as you were still fighting, you were still attached, still invested, still reachable. But when you walk away, without needing to land the final blow, without needing applause, without needing them to confess what you already know, the thread breaks. And when it breaks, life gets quieter in the best possible way. Walking away whole is not dramatic, but it is powerful. It means you leave with your values, your mind, your future, and your dignity still in your hands. It means you stop sacrificing your peace for a kind of closure that was never really being offered. It means you realize that completion can happen inside you before it ever happens outside you. This does not mean there is no grief. There is grief. There is grief for the time spent hoping, grief for the parts of yourself that got trained to overfunction. Grief for the version of love you wanted to believe was possible. But mixed into that grief is something stronger than sadness. Relief. Relief that you no longer have to translate your pain into acceptable language. Relief that you no longer have to monitor every word, every mood, every possible reaction. Relief that your body can stop bracing. This is the kind of change people around you may feel before they fully understand it. You laugh differently. You rest differently. You move through your day with less static in your chest. Little things become easier again. Food tastes better. Sleep gets deeper. Silence stops feeling scary and starts feeling sacred. And that shift is not small. It is your life returning to you. The person who once depended on your constant engagement may not understand this at all. They may read your peace as rejection because they only knew how to measure closeness through intensity. But you are no longer living by that measure. You are choosing wholeness over drama, and that choice has a calm authority that no argument can match. Healing is not cruel. It only looks cruel to people who benefited from your wounds staying open. That truth is hard, but it is freeing. So many people carry guilt when they begin to detach. Guilt for leaving, guilt for setting limits, guilt for not answering the same way. Guilt for valuing their own peace after years of trying to preserve someone else's comfort at the cost of their own. But guilt is not always proof that you are doing something wrong. Sometimes it is just the feeling of breaking an old pattern that once defined your role. Choosing yourself can feel unnatural at first when self-sacrifice has been praised, expected, or exploited for a long time. Yet that choice is often the beginning of real life. Every boundary you keep becomes a statement. Every day you do not abandon yourself becomes a repair. Every calm response, every no, every quiet exit from chaos becomes part of a new inner structure, one built on self-respect instead of survival. And yes, healing carries grief. It asks you to mourn illusions. It asks you to face how long you lived on crumbs and called it enough. It asks you to forgive yourself for what you accepted while you were still learning. But healing also brings relief so deep it almost feels strange at first. You realize that love should not require self-erasure, respect should not feel rare, peace should not feel guilty. And once those truths settle into your bones, you stop chasing what hurts, you start building what holds. That is when your life begins to bloom from the inside out. As this process continues, your world starts becoming clearer in simple ways that matter more than people think. You stop overreading every message. You stop scanning every room for tension. You stop spending your best energy preparing for the next emotional storm. The future begins to feel open again. Not perfect, not magically easy, but possible. That matters, because one of the deepest effects of control is how small it makes your life feel. It can shrink your decisions, your confidence, your friendships, your time, even your sense of what you deserve. But once you step back, space returns. You remember things you like. You remember what calm feels like in your own body. You remember that your thoughts can belong to you without being challenged every step of the way. And slowly, then strongly, you begin to create a life that is no longer organized around someone else's chaos. This is where your power becomes obvious. Not because you announce it, but because you live from it. You choose differently. You speak differently. You spend time differently. You protect your mind like it matters, because now you know it does. And that new way of living sends one final message more powerful than anything you could have said before. You are no longer available for what breaks you. If you are still listening, hold on to that line. Let it sink in. Because that is not pride. That is wisdom earned the hard way. That is what happens when pain stops being your teacher and self-respect takes over the job. And here is the deeper truth beneath all of it. The real victory was never making them understand. The real victory was understanding yourself. It was seeing the pattern clearly enough to stop calling it fate. It was noticing how much of your life had been spent in explanation, repair, and emotional exhaustion, then deciding that your future would not be built the same way. That is the shift that matters, not their panic, not their reactions, not their attempts to regain footing. Those things may happen, and when they do, they reveal a lot. But they are no longer the center of the story. You are. Your clarity is. Your peace is. Your ability to wake up and feel your own mind again is. That is why the ending of this journey is not really an ending at all. It is a beginning. A beginning where your energy returns to your own hands. A beginning where your worth is no longer debated. A beginning where your days are shaped by alignment instead of fear. That kind of life does not arrive all at once, but it does arrive, especially when you keep choosing what is clean over what is familiar. And the more you do that, the less interesting the old chaos becomes. Its pull weakens, its stories lose color, its hooks stop catching, until one day you realize the thing that once ruled your emotions now feels far away, almost unreal, like a storm you can still describe but no longer live inside. So if you needed a sign, let this be it. The silence you were afraid to trust may be the same silence that saves you. The distance you once called loss may actually be space for your life to return. The calm you worried would make you seem cold may be the first honest warmth you have given yourself in years. You do not have to keep shrinking to keep the peace. You do not have to keep explaining what should have been obvious to anyone who cared enough to listen. You do not have to keep proving your worth to someone who benefited from your doubt. You can step back. You can get quiet. You can choose yourself without apology. And when you do, something beautiful happens. The fear that once followed you begins to loosen. The chaos that once defined the connection begins to fade. The control that once felt huge begins to look small, not because the past did not matter, but because it no longer owns the future. That is the new look of strength, not loud, not bitter, not theatrical. Clear eyes, steady breath, strong boundaries, a softer heart with wiser doors. And from that place, you do not need to win their game. You simply stop playing it. That is how you walk away whole. That is how you reclaim your life. And that is how your real story begins. Not in their panic, but in your peace, your freedom, and the quiet power of finally coming home to yourself.